if you're counting. Hi, everyone. It's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. Emil Amok to you. Welcome to my Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. You know, we do this like a radio talk show. You put it on your, whatever, your player. It's the secret podcast. We don't put it on regular podcast. We're not looking for an audience. I'm in my podcast closet, and I'm just talking to you and whoever you are. But, I mean, you can find us on YouTube at Emil Amok 1. You can find us on Twitter or X, formerly known as Twitter, at Emil Amok, EMILAMOK. You can find us on Facebook. Amazing how many people still on Facebook. And I was reading something today that was really kind of surprising. Meta's sales jump as ads rebound. Growth of 23% in revenue is largest year over year since third quarter of 2021. And if you will recall, in the early days of Facebook, now known as Meta, formerly known as Facebook, you'll recall people were saying, we don't know how they're going to make money. We just don't know how they're going to make money. If you are old enough, you know how ridiculous it was to question Facebook. And I might just be older than most of you to go all the way back to the beginning when I was looking at this red book filled with all the women of the freshman class thinking, this is nice. This is nice to stare at these photographs. I never once said, wouldn't it be nice to have this digitized on a computer? Because we didn't have one. We didn't have a computer that did that. We had to be salacious on our own, with our own thoughts, with a book, in the, as they say, the analog world. I was so analog. Emil, you're so analog. No, I'm not analog. Clearly, I'm digital now, talking to you on Emil Amok's Takeout. But yeah, you can find us on Facebook. Isn't that amazing, though? I mean, I'm still doing this on Facebook because it's cheaper to do this than to buy a what they used to call a broadcast stick. That's what the macho broadcasters in Texas would call a transmitter. Oh, I got a stick. Got a broadcast stick. Which used to cost tens of thousands of dollars, right? And now I just go on live on Facebook and I say, here I am. It's like the old time talk radio show, except you didn't know your talk radio host was Filipino, did you? No, because they sounded, you didn't know. And there weren't any. It was just me. And of course, I was too left wing for the conservatives. So never could hold a job. Not as a talk radio host, but as a reporter, I usually eked out a few years. Anyway, we're here Monday through Friday to talk about the news. And I must say, I started getting my physical paper again, which I love because then you can tell exactly how important a story is in the eyes of the editors. So this, for example, this Meta story is on the front page of Business. Not really too important. I mean, it didn't make the front page. It didn't make A1. It didn't make top of the fold. I mean, those were all old ways to look at the news, but important ways. I mean, you look at your phone and how can you tell if, that's they're all the same based on when you scroll, scrolling. These are the live C scrolls. It's all about scrolling, going like this. If you see me on YouTube, I just got a funny little buzz in my ear. Anyway, we're here. Lots to talk about today. We're still going to talk about Larry Itliong. More on Larry Itliong. Apparently, there was some buzz in California. It was Larry Itliong Day. Who is Larry Itliong, you say? Well, he's the most deserving erasered Filipino in Filipino American history. The most deservingly unerased Filipino American. What did he do? Well, he just He just merged the labor movement and the civil rights movement in America. When he started the Delano grape strike, oh, Emil, that sounds wrong. Wasn't that Cesar Chavez? That's why he's been erased, and we're unerasing him. We're talking about him again. His birthday was on the 25th. Jerry Brown in 2015 made it Larry Itliong Day. A number of schools and public places were named after Larry Itliong. I just want to make sure that everyone knows about Larry Itliong. Seven Finger Larry. We'll get into it a little later. We'll get into what he said, his sayings, after we briefly look at the news. You know, Israel still is top of mind, but I think we have to talk a little bit about the whole gun situation yesterday. I mean, I was alarmed when I started looking through social media and saw it reported as 22 dead. Well, you knew that number was going to come. It would either go up or go down. We were hoping it would come down, and it did, because better sources, I saw news reports say as low as 7. Of course, that number was going to go up. Now we're up to 18. People were hurt. People will die. But this is, I mean, you might say, what difference does it make, the gun count or the dead count? Well, because the more dead, the more we'll take it seriously. Maybe let's hope it's significant. One is too many. We said that a number of times. But but here's the difference with this one in Maine, in Lewiston, Maine. The gunman is loose. The gunman is still at large. The gunman would relieve us of having to go find him by just saying, yeah, I've done my job and now I'm going to take my life. And that was almost like a courtesy. And now this guy is wreaking more havoc by being at large, and no one can find him. You got hundreds of police officers on the hunt for a man, this guy Robert Card, 40, who has a military background, considered armed and dangerous, suspected in the killing of 18 people. We don't want to convict him here on Facebook. Authorities closed schools, told residents to remain inside as the sprawling search continued for the suspect, the aforementioned 40-year-old Robert Card. The massacre was at a bowling alley and a restaurant, was the deadliest U.S. mass shooting of 2023 and the 10th worst in modern American history, according to Axios. The deadliest of the year, 2023. The 10th worst. We're ranking them now. We're not acting, but it's almost like the hit parade. And it's shameful because what will it take? You think, a school? Oh, no. Oh, a university? No. Oh, not a university, not a school, not school children, young school children, high school, public workplace, not a theater, not a concert in Vegas, not a nightclub in Orlando, not a movie theater in Denver. I mean, I mention them and you know exactly what I mean. The answer is no. We're not ready to take action in America. And now a bowling alley and a restaurant in Lewiston, Maine, the 36th shooting this year with 4 or more deaths. Officials searching for the suspect in both land and water. And the first time, really, that we're sort of force or law enforcement is out there looking, searching for the gunman. And it's up there near Canada, so the Canada Border Services Agency, they're out there on guard. A car owned by Card, who is a U.S. Army reservist, was found near a river where he keeps a 15-foot boat that remains unaccounted for, so maybe he's on a boat. I mean, it's America's vacation land, right? Isn't that what they say about Maine? Portland, which is Maine's largest city, closed its public buildings And President Biden offered federal assistance to Maine's governor and ordered U.S. flags to be flown at half staff until sunset on Monday, because this is the war at home. This is the domestic war at home. And all the victims, they were terrorized by an American gunman, a reservist, who is inflicting terroristic pain on our society. I don't know what his ideology was. I don't know. No one is releasing much about Card, except those basics that I mentioned, that he had some kind of mental instability and he was confined or under observation for a while. I believe last year that came out. But it's not like he's got some kind of ideological thing. No one has discovered a manifesto. So this is going to be a turning point in terms of shootings in America. I think is this an angry white man? That used to be the look. And then you had angry young guys in their 20s who had neo-Nazi type of leanings. This guy Card is a reservist. So is he? Kind of wonder who he voted for, huh? In the last election. So don't know if he's MAGA, we just know he's at large. And that means the next big story, the next big moment in the story is when they find him. Wow, when they find him cornered. And then maybe then he says, thanks for the game. I'm ending this now. And how we could fix this if we only made the right decisions policy-wise, only elected the right people and move forward to restrict these assault weapons. Because the man had an AR type assault weapon. Only way he could kill at least 18 dead is with a semi-automatic. If he had to go one at a time, would we be better off if we could say, a man in Maine is at large after killing 6 people? Would that make us feel better? I don't know. 18 is horrifying. If it was a lesser number, still bad. 1's bad. So, Lewiston, Maine. Maine is way up there. I've been there once. Beautiful. Loved vacationing there one summer. It was just, we went up to the Acadia National Park. Beautiful to see the sunrise there. And then up around, Bar Harbor, and then we go through Portland. I think we missed Lewiston, which was just off the main highway. Got down to Portland. It's near Portland. Portland I liked. Portland, Maine, which is what Portland, Oregon is named after. It's named after Portland, Maine, apparently. But it's tucked off there. And, they've got a drug problem now. I mean, it's not so, Portland, the idea of Maine is that it's kind of, these are where the elites go to vacation. Like, the Bushes were in Kennebunkport, and I don't know, a lot of people from Massachusetts, they love to go to Maine. East Coasters love Maine. But this is a moment, I think, a turning point. Let's see what happens. Said the same thing the first time a gunman, killed people in a theater. First time a gunman went to an elementary school, a high school, a college, a disco. It was never enough to change the attitude of our policymakers. A parade, right? I mean, you can go on and on. It's just a grocery store, a spa. It's just sad, ridiculous. And I wish we didn't have to talk about it. But we do, because as we talk about it, we realize just how ridiculous it is. And how we're unable to do anything about it. Anyway, next big story will be finding Robert Card. And when they do, maybe we'll find a motive. Maybe we'll find out why. All right. Israel's still in the news. Big story today. Again, Axios reported this. You know, everyone, all the major players, they have different audiences when they speak out about different things in the news, right? So President Biden was speaking to Australian media at a news conference with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. And this is what President Biden said. According to Axios, for the first time, Biden signaled what his plan would be for the day after the war in Gaza, indicating there is light at the end of the tunnel, but it's still dim, but it's light. A new generation of peace talks in the Middle East based on a two-state solution looks in the offing with Israel, in which Israel would coexist with a Palestinian state. Now, they talked about this for years. I never really thought it was dead. It was just one option. Two-state solution better than a one-state solution. Now Biden is bringing it back because isn't it funny how when Hamas struck Israel October 7th, no one was really talking about a two-state solution then. No one. They should have been. I mean, because that really is the only viable option to peace. But I have to admit, I was asleep at the switch. I was thinking, oh, I don't have to pay attention to the Middle East. I could just look at other Asian American things. I could look at the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea and the Spratly Islands and what China's doing there. I could look at Ukraine. I could look at, there's all sorts of little hot spots now. I didn't, and everyone sort of has this idea that, well, Israel, the Middle East, it's like a forever war kind of situation. We're never getting out of that. So I have to admit, now it's back on the table, or at least Biden is talking about it. He's calling for a concentrated effort to begin talking about a two-state solution. And Axios here reporting that represents a pivot for the president, a PFP, pivot for the president. Biden had focused largely on trying to avoid conflict between Israeli and Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, and securing a big peace deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which, if you backtrack and look at what all the discussion was before, it wasn't Israel and Gaza. It wasn't Israel and Hamas. It really was, what are the Saudis doing? And, Saudi Arabia has been on its campaign, its PR campaign with Live Golf, although it kind of blew it with the Khashoggi death, but Khashoggi murder. But that's where the Biden administration seemed focused on, we're going to do something big with Saudi Arabia. Well, now it's back to Israel. Axios reports it, but after Hamas's October 7th terrorist attack on Israel, there's no going back to the status quo between Israel and the Palestinian Authority as it stood on October 6th. So just as people said, oh, in Israel, 9/11. Now, this is our 9/11. Well, yeah, it has 9/11 type of impact, because now people say October 7th happened. We're not going back to October 6th. Biden said this during a news conference with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Quote, Israel and Palestinians equally deserve to live side by side in safety, dignity, and peace, Biden said. And there's no going back to the status quo as it stood on October the 6th. That means ensuring Hamas can no longer terrorize Israel and use Palestinian civilians as human shields. These are basic talking points that the administration has been saying since October 7th. But it's true. Hamas does use its people as human shields. It also means that when this crisis is over, there has to be a vision of what comes next. And in our view, it has to be a two-state solution. It means a concentrated effort from all the parties, Israelis, Palestinians, regional partners, global leaders, to put us on a path toward peace. See, now, I was saying it naturally because that's the only path to peace that we've heard of in the last 15 years that made some sense for both sides. And now it's come out. I don't know if that means that you can thank Hamas for its terrorist act to make us talk about peace again. That doesn't make sense. I think a simple phone call would have done, but no one would have listened, maybe. Axios behind the scenes says during a phone call with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, Biden noted the importance of a permanent pathway to peace for Israelis and Palestinians after this crisis. Now, you thought maybe it was, like I said, that was the talk before Obama, two-state solution. And then suddenly, under Obama, nothing. Under Trump, nothing. And under Biden, well, Biden's bringing it back. There's hope for something looking like peace instead of something looking like war. Biden emphasized to Netanyahu that Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinian people or their legitimate aspirations for a state of their own. That actually is a good point, and one of the major points that I keep saying now, because this is all we got. We could go back to 1917 and the Balfour Declaration and Britain, plopping the Jews in Israel and forcing the Jews to live side by side the Palestinians. We can go back then. We can go back to 1948. And then we can also see what happened in 1966, which was nothing. Americans did not take this whole thing as seriously until 67, the war, and then 69 and 73. And then really over the last 50 years, we've been dealing with this as we should, because look who the big imperial power is. Not the British. It's the U.S. And I don't know if you want to call it the imperial power, but the superpower of the world. And what have we done since 1973? Yeah, some things, to bring, it's always inching toward peace. We're never at peace. Or, there's, not a full-on permanent peace, certainly. But two-state solution has been a goal for decades. And finally, they're kind of bringing it back. It's like an oldie but goodie, which I welcome now, because at least that's something that we can understand, right? Israel, Palestine living together. Although we've got maybe the worst period of animosity, and you got to say that Hamas didn't help out the Palestinians with that terrorist attack on October 7th. You have Muslims in America saying, hey, we're trying to make it work. What are you doing? And then I go to my Israeli friends in the Philippines saying, what now? And they say, we got to eliminate Hamas. So that's kind of where we're at. And the only thing working is Israel has continued its airstrikes, which has, this is a public opinion war now, right? Hearts and minds. And it's one thing when the Palestinians have been exposed as having a bomb go off in a hospital there in Gaza. It wasn't the Israelis. But now the Israelis aren't helping themselves with, these constant airstrikes and the slowness in getting humanitarian aid to Gaza. What has happened is people are paying attention again to Gaza, and they're realizing just how much we don't know, how much we haven't been paying attention to Gaza. I mean, I'm reminded how in 1989, there was this thing called the Intifada, where Palestinians were throwing rocks at Israel, and Israel was slowly expanding. Israel was plopped down initially in the region, right, by the British. And so it was a colonial action, and the Jews were displaced because of the Holocaust. Okay. But something happened since 48, 67, 73. The Jews got expansionist. The Jews in Israel took on almost a colonial nature. And what happened to the Palestinians? Well, most of them were on the run, refugees, displaced. And then radicals took over, like Hamas, the governing party. And now, who speaks for the Palestinians? I mean, there's a divide in the Middle East now among Palestinians, because when they were able to peacefully coexist, Israel and Palestine, there was prosperity. I mean, relative to now. So there's been a lot of just, when it's difficult to take a side here. You see the torture, or you see the terrorist act, October 7th, and you say, yeah, Israel has a right to defend itself. But then you go back and you look at the history and you say, where has Israel gone wrong? And what about the Palestinians? Why haven't the Palestinians been able to secure, their right to exist? And, I've been talking to people on the ground in Israel, hearing from them, getting their point of view. But I go to the universities and talk to the people who are teaching Palestinian studies, the people who are teaching Black studies and, diaspora studies. And they give me an earful. And I realize the history really doesn't add up. And at that point, what you have to do is say, okay, history is great. It gives us a context. What are we going to do now? And so I'm heartened by what Joe Biden was saying at that press conference with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Because it looks like two-state solution coming back. Maybe with a vengeance, maybe it makes sense. Although if you listen to honest intellectuals, and now some people might say, oh, Emil, Noam Chomsky is not on. I think Noam Chomsky, I would trust him. I mean, and when you hear what he's been saying about Israel and Gaza, he always insists that you can't say Israel without saying the United States. So that means we here in the United States have more power because we can make sure that policy gets driven in the right place. Maybe. I mean, if we pay attention, elect the right people, because right now we have a well, it's certainly not. It's certainly biased toward the Israelis right now, and in politics. And so you have to look at yesterday's vote. And yesterday they voted for a speaker. They got a speaker. He's not a great. I don't think he's a great choice. Doesn't say much when your choice is speaker. The reason why he's considered such a good speaker is because he refused to certify the 2020 election. I think that's a bad foot to start off on. So I'm a little taken aback by that. Don't like that at all. But Mike Johnson, he's the number 3. He's passed legislation. Maybe he's moderate enough, although I can't see it. And this is a guy who also knew a lot about January 6th. So not sure if that's going to help. Now, if they took a vote, a resolution yesterday that declared support for Israel, it was the first measure for Johnson. And the bill asserts that the House stands with Israel as it defends itself against the barbaric war launched by Hamas and other terrorists, and reaffirms Israel's right to self-defense. This is the American standard view of the war. And this is why it's interesting to hear Biden come out with, we got to seek a 2-state solution. It's almost like he's talking to 2 separate audiences, right? He's talking to Israel and talking to the international world when he speaks to Australia. And the Congress here, well, Congress was closed, right? I mean, they weren't open. But this resolution they passed is really just to kind of rubber stamp the same old vision of Israel backed by the U.S. And what's I think you got to look at the 10 people who voted no. Actually, 9 Democrats voted no on supporting Israel in this resolution, which doesn't mean a whole lot, except it puts you on the record as you're for a more balanced, unbiased view of what's happening with Palestinians. I think it's one thing to say, yeah, damn Hamas, but then what are you saying about Palestinians? So I think you got to look at the people who voted no, and the 9 no votes: Jamal Bowman, New York; Andre Carson, Indiana; Cori Bush, Missouri; Al Green, Texas; Summer Lee, Pennsylvania; Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, New York; Ilhan Omar, Minnesota, of course; Delia Ramirez, Illinois; Rashida Tlaib, Michigan; Thomas Massey, Kentucky. They voted no, that the measure would call for sanctions on a foreign country and force an open-ended promise of military support that is so broad. So they're being, I mean, notice Barbara Lee of Oakland didn't vote along with that group. So she was in support of Israel. Wonder if that was a political thing, because she's running for senator. She needs the support of the Jewish lobby. 6 other Democrats opted to vote present, which essentially meant we're stepping out. We're not voting yes or no. Greg Casar, Texas. Joaquin Castro, Texas. Jesus Garcia, Illinois. Pramila Jayapal, Washington. Ayanna Pressley, Massachusetts, and Nydia Velasquez, New York. There's some squad members there. The progressives. This is how you play the political vote. And this is just the way it is right now. I mean, it's hard to take any kind of stand against Israel. You take a stand against terrorism, fine. But what do you do? And you say, Hamas isn't the Palestinians. Palestinians aren't Hamas. Okay, great. What do you do about the Palestinian people? The ones in refugee camps who aren't going back, who were displaced, who have been terrorized all their lives by a repressive situation, whether it's Israelis, whether it's Hamas. Most live in poverty in Gaza. What do you do about them? And so I have to admit, listening to some Palestinian scholars, listening to Noam Chomsky, you wonder, how are we going to get out of this? I don't know. I think one thing is to watch, keep Biden at his word. 2-state solution, let's see. If Trump becomes a nominee, 2-state solution will be maybe, if you look at how Trump acted when he was in charge, he gave Israel everything it wanted, which means it looks like, the idea is that, and Noam Chomsky brings this up, Israel and the U.S. are inseparable when you consider their position. And the U.S. has more power than it thinks. And people here in the U.S. have more power than you think. Because you can tell the people in your representative government to make the policy decisions that move us to peace. And it may be that the 10 who did not vote, or the 9 who did not vote to support Israel, maybe they're right. Maybe that is the pathway to peace. Although Biden is saying, hey, look, we're going to come up with this 2-state solution. No details, but this has been eluding diplomats for decades. At least he's putting it on the table. All right, so that is progress, I guess. You got Israel agreeing to delay, right, invasion of Gaza. That's helpful. You got Hamas using hostages to extract concessions from Israel. So there's negotiation, there's people talking. And I don't know, when this started in October 7th, a friend of mine said, maybe this will last 2-3 months. I don't know. Forever war, takes a while. But we have more power here in the United States than we think to try to direct this, because Israel will do what the U.S. says. The U.S. is the big supplier of money. We just have to support candidates who will work for peace. And if they work for peace, it means they don't give unlimited funds to an effort that is hateful and destructive and against, if Biden's for a 2-state solution, let's see more details. Let's see more details. But that's a hopeful sign. At least that's a hopeful sign. All right. I wanted to talk more about Larry Itliong because, people don't understand, the importance of Larry Itliong. You know, he was a tough guy, nicknamed Seven Fingers, and he was a fighter. That's the thing about Chavez. Chavez wasn't even in the picture, wasn't even a labor unionist when the 1965 strike began. When the 1965 strike began, the Filipinos, who'd been out there in the fields for decades, they were in their 50s and 60s, they led the strike. In that first week of September 1965, they were out there. Chavez had a little organization, but the organization was kind of like a social group. It didn't have the bite of a striking union force. That's what the Filipinos, who were AFL-CIO, that's what they had. When they went on strike, a week later, they went to Chavez and his group and said, hey, the Mexican laborers are going to be the next big thing. We need you. And then they took a vote, and then they joined the Filipinos. That's how it worked. The Delano grape strike. Now, here's the thing about Larry. He lost 3 fingers in a cannery accident because he came here in the 20s, worked as a migrant from the fields, and then went up and down California, really centering on the Central Valley. But then when they weren't picking, he'd go up to the canneries. Had an accident, lost 3 fingers, nicknamed Seven Fingers. I mean, he's known as a guy who wouldn't back down. He was kind of like a good guy Trump. Yeah, because Trump is kind of like a guy who never backed down, but he's a guy who never backed down even though he's losing, even though he's wrong, even though he's a liar. Larry was a social justice version of that, who was right. And that's why he fought. He said on a tape to students in 1976, which is just a year before he died in 1963, he said, I have the ability to make that white man know I am just as mean as anybody in the world. I can make him think, and I can make them recognize that I'm a mean son of a bitch in terms of my direction fighting for the rights of Filipinos in this country, because I feel we are just as good as any of them. I feel we have the same rights as any of them, because in that Constitution, it said that everybody has equal rights and justice. You've got to make that come about. They are not going to give it to you. Man, I heard that on that tape. Manong Larry! Oh, you're my hero. Manong Larry. Indeed, there was a lot to fight for. Itliong says Filipinos in the fields would too often find themselves netting less than 75 cents for an 8-hour day. That's 10 cents an hour. And because of their status, they were barred from owning property, marrying, starting families. That was the life for Filipinos. He said, prior to 1936, we were nobody. We're not considered nationals, aliens, not considered citizens. We're nothing. We're nothing in this country. It means you don't have any kind of recognition. The correction of that broader slight could ultimately restore Itliong to his rightful role as a major labor leader in the U.S. And it's long overdue. I mean, it's already started. 2015, the Chavez family acknowledged Itliong, started the strike. Chavez joined. Jerry Brown, then governor, had Larry Itliong Day. I mean, it's important. Larry Itliong was one of a kind. You know, he was fearless. He was loud. He was very public. A very public Asian American of Filipino descent. He was open and blunt, and he had that cigar. And he said this on tape. Lots of Pinoys don't like me because I'm an outspoken person, he said. And on that tape to UC Santa Cruz. He said, if I don't like you, I'll tell you, you know? But if I know you're wrong, I'll tell you you're wrong. But if you don't tell me I'm wrong, how can I correct myself? And how can we progress? Especially in this country. Here in the United States, there's a very few of us. The least we can do is to be able to understand and be able to work with each other. That's what made Larry Itliong a leader. That's what made him a person who pushed for Filipino Americans. And that's why when people talk about, Larry Itliong, who is he? We need to honor him again. That's why he's a guy that everyone who's Filipino American points to and say, October 25th, Larry Itliong's birthday. That's why, one of the reasons why October is his, or Filipino American History Month. Because of Larry Itliong. I mean, he knows what happened to Filipinos in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the grape strike in the 60s. And then he was forgotten. Just, he left the Union. I tell that story yesterday, how he won the vote and then, he was there for a couple of years, then he left to do his own thing. But he died young, early 60s, 63, ALS. Sad. But Larry Itliong is the great Filipino American historical omission. And we're making up for it by talking about him during Filipino American History Month. So, there, we talked about Israel, Gaza, Hamas, a congressional vote. We talked about getting it right. I had a weird conversation with my daughter. And I woke up at 1:30 in the morning. It wasn't a conversation. It was more like an email. I said, God, here's a video I saw. What do you think about this? And she made me realize that the Philippines is like a combination of Israel and Palestine. How's that? Well, the only reason why the U.S. is really interested in Israel is because it provides a strategic geopolitical advantage, right? By its location. Just like the Philippines is strategic in where it's placed in Asia. That's why the Filipinos were a colony. And there were other reasons too. They didn't colonize Israel. But the support for Israel shows the linkage is strong. And then the Filipinos are like Palestine too. Because the Palestinians have been displaced and how they've been treated over the years. Not just, by the occupiers. The Filipinos, they've been occupied by Spain, by the U.S. The U.S. was there for 40-some years. Spain, hundreds of years. But we could relate to all those involved in the Israeli Gaza situation. In fact, there's like 50,000 Filipinos there now who are there as part of the Filipino diaspora. And most of them, as I told the story about the Filipino caregiver who, when she was face to face with the Hamas terrorist, she said, here's all the money I have. Leave us alone. They took the money, took her iPhone, they left. And she's called a hero. She had a plane ticket to go to the Philippines after October 7th. She stayed to help her employer, 93, 94-year-old woman, wheelchair bound. Those are the stories of Filipino Americans in Israel. They're not leaving. It's hard. It's hard for my friend who lives there now, has lived there for the last 10 years. He's not leaving. But I realize that he has a viewpoint that is biased Israeli. But it's hard to deny this idea of, once you understand what Hamas stands for, the total elimination of the Israelis, the Jews, how do you negotiate a peace that way? So when the news comes up that Joe Biden is looking for a two-state solution, let's hope something happens now, because we are at a different place than we've been the last 15 years. Since Obama, certainly. And we need to wake up, understand what we've got. Forget about the far history, and let's think about where we are now and how to go forward to peace. Okay, that's our show for today. Hey, look, not easy, this stuff, but I hope hearing someone like myself talk about it and working it out, we can come to this idea. We don't need protests. We need teach-ins. We need to understand how we got here. And maybe if we do, we'll find a way out that will work. But I think whatever Hamas did on October 7th set us back. And we got to recorrect to move forward. All right. Hey, I'm Emil. Amok's Takeout, name of the show. My takes on all things considerable. We're here Monday through Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific or thereabouts. Or we play a tape when something goes up. Like, I got to see a dentist. You got to, Yeah, it's like a radio talk show, like my columns that I write. Just Google me, find my columns all over. And I have a take. And I got to let it out. So thank you for joining me on YouTube at Emil Amok 1, on Facebook, fb.com/EmilGuillermo.media, on Twitter at Emil Amok, also on amok.com. Some replays available there. All right, we like to meditate, which is the art of doing nothing purposefully. Actually, I like the metta meditation, METTA, loving kindness, because that's what we're after, a little loving kindness. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal Kita.